Tonight, a single word is doing a lot of work for President Trump. That word is framework. Trump says he has a framework of a future deal involving Greenland and Arctic security. His critics say it's not a deal at all. And allies are signaling whiplash because the stakes are not just political, they are strategic. So here's the question we're answering tonight. What does Trump's Greenland framework actually mean in real-world terms? And why does it matter? Because if you only watch the headlines, you'll miss the real story. The real story is not, did Trump buy Greenland? The real story is how Trump uses language, leverage, and pressure to turn an idea into a headline, and a headline into a negotiating position. Tonight, we'll break this down in 5 layers. 1, what's been publicly reported about the framework. 2, why framework is a power word for Trump. 3, what the negotiable real-world targets are beneath the rhetoric. 4, why Denmark, Greenland, and NATO reacted so sharply. And 5, what to watch next and what outcomes are realistically possible. This is news analysis, not legal advice, not a verdict, not a rumor mill. This story is developing. Details can change as more information emerges. We will separate reported facts from analysis at every step. Let's start with the simplest version of the story. In January 2026, Trump publicly claimed he and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte had formed a framework of a future deal related to Greenland and the broader Arctic region. Reporting describes this as tied to a period of pressure and mixed signals, including tariff threats and then walkbacks, followed by Trump presenting the framework as progress. At the same time, Denmark and Greenland have repeatedly stated a core position. Greenland is not for sale, and sovereignty is not up for discussion. But they have also signaled willingness to talk about security and economic issues, because the Arctic is not a symbolic chessboard anymore. It is an active strategic arena. So what exactly is in this framework? Here is the key point. Public reporting describes the concept as broad and not fully specified, with discussion circles touching Arctic security, missile defense, mineral access, and allied burden sharing. NATO's own messaging emphasizes that allies must step up on Arctic security, with early results expected this year. In other words, this looks less like a signed contract and more like a political container that can hold many different demands. So framework is the story, not the paperwork. Because the word framework lets Trump claim momentum without showing terms. Now, a fast rewind, because context changes how you interpret today. Trump's fascination with Greenland is not new. Back in 2019, during his first term, Trump floated the idea of buying Greenland. It generated global headlines. Denmark pushed back and the story faded. But here's what matters. That earlier episode showed the same pattern we're seeing now. Trump uses a maximal demand to dominate the narrative. The demand is rejected. And then the negotiable parts remain: security presence, investment influence, strategic messaging. So when you hear framework in 2026, don't treat it as a one-off. Treat it as a second act in a longer story. The US and the Arctic are getting more entangled, and Trump wants that entanglement to look like his personal accomplishment. Now, let's analyze why Trump is choosing this language. Trump's governing style depends on narrative ownership. He wants to name the situation, define the stakes, and force everyone else to respond to his definition. A deal is measurable. A deal can be disproven by documents and signatures. A deal creates accountability. A framework is different. A framework is flexible. It can be as real as a handshake or as vague as a conversation. It can be presented as a breakthrough, even while allies privately say, this is not finalized. And that flexibility is the advantage, because Trump's political brand is built on a promise: control. He is the I can force outcomes president, the I can bend institutions president, the I can put America first and make others move president. When he says framework, he is doing 3 things at once. First, declaring success early. Second, moving the discussion away from details and toward momentum. Third, creating leverage, Because once something is framed as progress, the question becomes, who is stopping progress? This is the hidden engine of Trump's diplomacy, forcing a binary. If you resist, you are the obstacle. If you comply, you validate the frame. And Greenland is a perfect stage for this kind of politics because it touches multiple hot buttons at the same time. National security, China and Russia in the Arctic, rare earths and minerals, missile defense and early warning, and the simple, emotionally resonant idea: America should be bigger, stronger, and harder to ignore. Now, if you want to understand why this story keeps returning, you have to understand what Greenland stands for. Greenland is geography. It sits at the intersection of North America, Europe, and the Arctic routes that are becoming more accessible as climate patterns shift. Greenland is infrastructure. It hosts key U.S. military capabilities, including space and missile warning functions associated with the U.S. presence there. Greenland is resources. People talk about minerals and rare earth elements because modern defense and modern tech require them, and supply chains are strategic now. And Greenland is politics. For Denmark and Greenlandic leaders, sovereignty is the headline. For Trump, power projection is the headline. For NATO, alliance cohesion is the headline. For Russia and China, the Arctic is an arena where they want options. So when Trump says framework, he's not just speaking about territory. He's speaking about influence over an entire region and the rules of the next decade. Now, let's talk about what Trump might actually be trying to get. This is the part that gets missed when the story is reduced to buy Greenland versus not for sale. In practice, there are several concrete outcomes that could be pursued without any transfer of sovereignty. Target 1. Expanded U.S. military access and basing, or expanded operational control under existing agreements. This could include more infrastructure, more personnel, more sensors, more investment. Target 2. A tighter investment screen. Rules that limit Chinese or Russian commercial influence over ports, minerals, undersea cables, or strategic infrastructure. Target 3. Mineral and resource partnerships. Not ownership, but preferential access, joint ventures, supply chain deals, or financing arrangements that tilt economic influence toward the U.S. and its allies. Target 4. A stronger NATO posture in the Arctic. Framed as collective security, but operationally aligned with U.S. priorities and U.S. command structures. Target 5. Burden sharing. Trump's language often implies a trade, U.S. reassurance in exchange for allied spending and commitments. Notice what all of those have in common. They can be packaged politically as a win, even if Greenland never changes hands. And this is where Trump's framework language becomes strategic. It's a container that can hold an Arctic security plan and still allow Trump to tell his audience, "We moved the world." So if you're looking for the smartest read of the situation, it's this. Trump may be using the Greenland brand name as pressure, while the negotiable items are access, influence, and alignment. Here's another key analysis point. Listen to the nouns. When Trump says ownership, he's speaking in absolutes. Ownership means permanence. It means control. It means the other side doesn't get to set conditions. But the practical policy world runs on access. Access is negotiated. Access has terms. Access is renewable. And access can be scaled up or down without rewriting borders. So if you want to measure realism, watch whether the rhetoric shifts over time. If Trump keeps saying ownership, that signals a dominance narrative. If the administration starts emphasizing access, partnership, and Arctic security, that signals they are trying to land a deal-like outcome without the sovereignty fight. Now, why did allies react so sharply? Because from the allied perspective, Trump's style creates an unstable environment. Fast moves, centralized decision-making, public threats, and then policy reversals. That matters because NATO operates on predictability and process. Alliance strength depends on the expectation that internal conversations are not instantly weaponized as public leverage. In reporting, diplomats and analysts described allies experiencing whiplash, not just because of Greenland, but because the same pattern appears across issues. A major claim, a sudden appointment or signal, a public escalation, then a partial retreat with a new framework or understanding. And this is where Greenland becomes symbolic. If Trump can publicly pressure Denmark and Greenland, two partners in the Western alliance, it sends a message to every other ally. This can happen to you. In alliance politics, that kind of pressure can have two outcomes. It can force concessions, or it can create deep resentment and long-term mistrust. Trump's bet is that fear produces compliance. The allied fear is that compliance rewards instability. Now, you may have seen a quote that cuts through all the noise. Some Danish voices reportedly describe the situation as definitely not a deal. Why does that line matter? Because it draws a bright boundary. A conversation is not a negotiation. A headline is not a treaty. And a framework is not, by itself, a commitment. It's a way of saying, if you want to call this progress, show the terms, show the parties, show the consent. And that leads us into the most sensitive part of this story. One reason this story triggers such strong emotion is the spoken-for dynamic. When powerful actors discuss Greenland's fate without Greenland at the table, it activates historical memory and sovereignty anxiety. That's why we see strong statements like "not for sale." Those statements are not only about economics, they're about identity and self-determination. And this is politically dangerous for Trump because it flips the moral frame. Trump wants security and strategy as the frame. Greenland and Denmark want sovereignty and agency as the frame. These frames do not mix. If the public story becomes great power bargaining over a smaller nation, the optics start to look colonial. And even if Trump believes he is speaking in pure strategic terms, that moral frame can travel fast in Europe and among American audiences sensitive to legitimacy. Now here's a crucial reset. The United States already has military presence and access in Greenland through long-standing arrangements with Denmark. Public reporting and fact-checking explain that a 1951 defense agreement allows the U.S. to maintain facilities in Greenland as part of mutual defense within NATO. So if the question is purely security, can the U.S. defend the Arctic? The answer is not only if we own Greenland. Ownership is a political claim, not a technical requirement. Access can be expanded through agreements. Radar and missile defense can be improved through cooperation. Infrastructure can be developed through joint investment. And allied posture can be reinforced through NATO planning. So why does Trump keep using ownership language? Because it's not just about operational access. It's about a narrative of dominance and permanence. Ownership signals, we are not guests, we are the permanent power. That message plays well with a certain segment of voters. Strong nation, strong leader, no apologies. But internationally, that language triggers alarm, because it suggests a willingness to blur lines of sovereignty and consent. And in an alliance, blurred lines create panic. Now let's talk about the risk for Trump. The strength of framework is flexibility. The weakness of framework is falsifiability over time. Here's how it backfires. If allies publicly say, "This is not a deal," Trump's claim starts to look like exaggeration. If the framework never produces visible outcomes, Trump's claim starts to look like a headline without substance. And if the administration escalates rhetoric while outcomes remain vague, voters in the middle begin to read it as chaos, not strength. That middle matters. Pressure requires at least some public legitimacy. So the trap is this. The more Trump sells the framework as a win, the more he has to deliver a tangible result. But delivering a tangible result is hard when the core demand, ownership, is rejected. This is why the administration may pivot toward deliverables that are more achievable. An Arctic security package, expanded basing rights, investment restrictions on China and Russia, or a NATO spending and posture commitment. If Trump can point to a concrete deliverable, he can say, "This is what the framework produced," and he can keep the victory narrative alive. Now, we need to talk about the method. In reporting about Trump's second term, one repeated theme is the use of deadlines, tariffs that are scheduled to begin, threats that have clocks attached, and then a reversal that is presented as, "We got a deal," or "We reached an understanding." This is negotiation through public pressure. It's not quiet diplomacy. It's leverage theater. And Greenland is a textbook setting for leverage theater because the US is the central security provider in NATO. When the central provider introduces uncertainty, allies feel compelled to respond. So the framework story isn't only about Greenland. It's about the message to NATO: step up, align, and move, or face unpredictable consequences. Trump believes this produces results. Critics argue it produces instability. Both can be true at the same time, depending on your time horizon. Here are the 6 indicators to watch, the signals that will tell you what this framework really is. Indicator 1. Does the administration release specifics? If it stays vague, it's a narrative asset more than a policy document. Indicator 2. Does Denmark or Greenland announce any new security or investment measures? If yes, that's a sign U.S. pressure is translating into concessions on negotiable items. Indicator 3. Does NATO talk about Arctic posture in concrete terms? Watch for language about deployments, exercises, infrastructure upgrades, or timelines. Indicator 4. Does Trump keep using ownership language, or does he shift to access and security partnership language? A shift would signal realism. The goal becomes deliverables, not territory. Indicator 5. Does the U.S. appoint a formal envoy or negotiating team with defined authority? That would turn framework from messaging into process. Indicator 6. Do we see any linkage? Meaning, is Arctic posture being tied to other priorities like funding fights, trade disputes, or Ukraine posture? If you want to predict what happens next, don't watch the slogans, watch the deliverables. Frameworks are measured by what they produce, not by what they claim. Scenario 1. The framework becomes a real Arctic package, a set of concrete steps: basing, radar, infrastructure, allied commitments, investment limits. Trump claims victory without territory changing hands. Scenario 2. The framework collapses into public contradiction. Allies keep denying it's a deal, details never arrive, and the story becomes Trump overpromised. That hurts credibility with allies and with the political middle at home. Scenario 3. Trump pivots to a new pressure target. He keeps Greenland as a symbol, but moves the spotlight to a new dispute, a new deadline, a new threat. This is attention management as strategy. Which scenario is most consistent with Trump's style? He starts with pressure. He demands public momentum. And if the path hardens, he either escalates or changes the subject while claiming progress. Here is the final takeaway. Trump's Greenland framework is not just a foreign policy claim. It is a demonstration of how Trump uses language as leverage. Deal is proof. Framework is pressure. And in the Trump era, pressure is often the point. If you want to understand where this goes, don't ask whether Greenland is for sale. Ask what Trump can extract without buying anything: access, alignment, spending, influence, and a headline he can call a win. Because the story is not just what Trump said, the story is what the word framework allows him to do.